Of all different types of theism, the one that many people will consider the most rational, or the most abstract, and the one that will argue is the strongest version of God to believe against, will be naturalist pantheism, where God and reality itself, or the universe, depending on your vocabulary, are one and the same. Here's the problem with naturalist pantheism, and why even atheists are against it, despite some atheists who themselves accept the label. The problem with naturalist pantheism is by the simple fact that it has no explanatory power by Occam's razor. Just by calling the universe God does not explain anything. It can still be explained by physics without the need for a God, no matter how impersonal it can be. It's an unnecessary hypothesis. It's a great example by Daniel Dennett, who did a critique called Mysteriousness in Naturalism. I will put links in the description. They heavily use on metaphorical language like awe or unity. So basically, the argument from religious experience, which has again no explanatory power whatsoever, and in many cases, there's arguments against the existence of such a God using the religious experience argument. It's basically a misleading or aesthetically inflated term that can be confused with atheism. And sometimes they use it, despite calling it some naturalists, like the religious variety, they often introduce terms or concepts that are, for the most part, depending which version of naturalist you subscribe to. I am a reductive physicalist. This will not apply, like cosmic consciousness, for example. These are like the language they use is based on mystical thinking, and it gets smuggled like woo nonsense unconsciously without every evidence to back it up. There's basically what I'm trying to say, at least from a scientific point of view. Naturalist pantheism is unfalsifiable. If they just use anything they like as divine without trying to explain how is that evidence of divineness, whatever how they define it. And there's no evidence to say the universe is God, no matter how abstract or impersonal it is. There's no evidence to support it. It is just the physical world with physical properties based on the quantum field theory. Everything is governed by quantum mechanics in quantum form and neutrinos. Nothing exists except neutrinos and quantum form. Everything else is opinion. And despite that, many people within the naturalist pantheist slash religious naturalist community still use religious languages that, like meaning or spiritual comfort or transcendence without any evidence what they say is correct by any minimal stretch of the term. And, it's basically atheist with the with if the stock goes into when it comes to religion. Or maybe they're true because, like I said, a whole portions of theism, naturalist pantheism, is by far the most likely one to may or may not exist. But even then, that's not saying much. Again, it has no explanatory power. They rely on metaphors instead of actually if they any explanatory power. If they is unfalsifiable, it's basically empty hypothesis and offers no grounding for any practicality about what is and what is not about reality itself. A great example is from a scholarly book by Grandma Hoppy, one of the leading philosophers of religion who defends atheism. In his book, Naturalism and Religion, a contemporary philosophical investigation, who actually makes the case against naturalist pantheism. And I quote in full: Pantheists typically claim two things: a natural reality is substantial reality, and natural reality is divine. Says naturalism, except the first one, natural reality is substantial causal reality, which is A. The only question is whether naturalists can also accept B. On the account that I've given, the central question is whether being divine either is a non-natural causal power or else entails possessions of non-natural causal power. Mandel in 2016 canvas without himself endorsing a list of putative reasons for supporting that natural reality is divine. These reasons include that natural reality is a unity, that natural reality is the appropriate object of pluralities, that natural reality supports a grand narrative, that natural reality is or might be infinite, eternal, and necessary, that natural reality is ineffable, that natural reality is personal, and that natural reality is axiologically perfect. Among the political reasons that Mander canvasses, these are several that can happily be embraced by naturalists who deny that natural reality is divine. The natural reality is a unity. The natural reality is the appropriate object of pluralities. The natural reality supports a grand narrative. The natural reality is or might be infinite, eternal, and necessary. Of course, it's a controversial whether natural reality is infinite, and it is controversial when the natural reality is eternal. And it's controversial whether natural reality is necessary. But even if natural reality possesses all three of these attributes, this provides no independent reason at all to suppose that natural reality is divine. Much the same goes for other properties mentioned, that natural reality is one, that supported a grand narrative, and that is an appropriate object of awe and wonder provides no independent reason at all to support that natural reality is divine. Among the putative reasons that Mander conveys, there are a couple that are really just non-starters. Non-naturalists can accept that natural reality is ineffable. That's ruled out by the claim that scientific method is a touchstone for identifying the destinies of natural reality. Since science does inform us about natural reality, it is not true that natural reality is ineffable. Moreover, non-naturalists can accept that natural reality is axiologically perfect. It's the most straightforward common sense that there are many ways in which natural reality could be better than it is. Once we eliminate the reasons that clearly are not up to the task, the only reason that we are given for taking the natural reality as divine is that natural reality is personal, at least in some kind of analogical sense. But even if it's consistent with naturalism to suppose that natural reality is personal, that at least in some kind of analogical sense, we then need to ask whether the attribute of personality entails the attribute of non-natural causal powers. It seems to me that it does. Even if we suppose that personality is to be understood in an ontological sense, it seems to me that being a personal entails has certain kinds of causal powers, such as those involved in thinking, feeling, sensing, and so on, where there's two are understood in the same kind of analogical sense. Clearly, there is nothing in science to tell us that natural reality has the power, so the proper conclusion to draw is that there are non-natural causal powers. Now, all naturalists suppose that the divine is personal, but those pantheists who suppose that the divine is not personal face the task of explaining how to understand their claims that natural reality is divine. If we follow the lead provided by Mander, it is hard not to reach the conclusion that pantheists, the naturalist variety, who suppose that the divine is not personal, are unable to discharge this debt. And for a reason just given, those pantheists who do suppose that the divine is personal are not naturalists, on the account of naturalism that Grandma Hoppy adopted. Elsewhere, Oppy has suggested a minimal characteristic of metaphysical naturalism should include A. The claim that the distribution of mindedness in the universe is late and local. That is, only minded entities are evoked creatures with relatively complex biological structures, and perhaps minded entities that are end result of the creative activities of those evoked creatures. And B. The claim that nothing is divine or sacred or worthy of worship. In the present work, he suggests that we should define naturalism as a byproduct of scientific naturalism and metaphysical naturalism, and that, if we do, we get A and B as plausible consequence of that definition. If Opp is right, that even though pantheists say that natural reality excels causal reality, it's still the case that pantheists are not naturalistic, and they further claim that natural reality is divine contradicts the claim that natural reality excels causal reality. Ergo, naturalist pantheism is a non-starter. So overall, the more broader term of religious/spiritual naturalism. Some claim to have big pictures that are both naturalistic and religious, where the religious content of these big pictures is for the conformity with the big pictures of one another great world religions. Let's consider one example. Bishop in 2018 claimed to believe they received a Christian faith. True enough, he said that there is a good deal of open-ended constability about what exactly Christians are required to believe about how our universe is. While he admits that some other Christians will not allow this, he interprets his own baptismal promise to believe all of the articles of the Christian faith as formulated in the historic creed as committed to trust that to receive tradition in creed and scripture conveying divine revelation. Bishop claimed to have a naturalistic understanding of the divine, just in the sense that he is an anti-supernaturalist. It rejects the ontological realm separate from a prior to the natural universe that is required for personal omni-God theism. He insists, however, that there is no implication that the divine is graspable through natural scientific inquiry. Any viable theism rejects such natural scientism. At the heart of Bishop's big picture, it suggests that theological explanation of the universe can be uniquely an irreducible theological explanation. In his view, there is no need to postulate a productive agent. Rather, the universe is seen to have an efficient cause because it is explicable in terms of its actual realized ultimate and supremely good telos. Well, he expects that some will be scandalized by the thought that in the order of the productive causality, the creator is dependent on his own creatures. He thinks this kind of scandal is actually entrenched in Christian tradition. The Dakota Bishop's ontological explanation of existence is that why everything exists, that does exist, and counts as created as to belong to a unified order whose telos is the supreme good that is actually fully realized. Initially, it seems that what Bishop commits himself to is to claim that the divine is to be identified with the sum total of loving interpersonal relation with the universe. But he also said that even the most exemplary loving relation, those manifested by Jesus, was being put to death by a combined political religious authority, do not exhaust the divine. What is divine is not just actual Christ-like relationship, but the full cosmic meaning of such loving relationship. And he said that real salvific, transformative, divine agency in the world is the agency of love itself, understood as the power that emerges from individual loving action in relationship, rather than being the result of external supernatural agency. The resurrection is the inherent effect of absolute steadfastness in living lovely. Bishop's account of his view is not easy to understand. Some of what Bishop says suggest that he thinks that final causes can also be efficient causes. The efficient cause of the existence of the universe is that within it there is a realization of the ultimate, supreme good of loving interpersonal relationship. But whether others may think about the prospect for an ancionic explanation of the existence of the universe, it seems to me that naturalists are commanded to reject this proposal. Science does not recognize efficient final causes. The efficient causes that the science does recognize are all such that it makes sense to suppose that they are necessarily associated with, perhaps even grounded in, or constituted from, or supersede above transfers of conserved fundamental natural quantities. However, there is no way that the coming into existence the universe could be associated with, or grounded in, or constituted from, or supervene upon transfer of conserved fundamental natural quantities from realization of the ultimate supreme good of loving interpersonal relationship. It is simply inconsistent with naturalism to suppose that the realization of the ultimate supreme good of loving interpersonal relationship is a sufficient cause for the existence of the universe. Some of what Bishop says suggests that he thinks the individual loving action in relationship and emerged causal powers that somehow constitute further real, subjective, transformative agency in the world. But whatever others may say, it seems to me to be very hard to make sense of the idea. There is no need to appeal to emergent causal powers in order to explain their achievements. Moreover, it's not clear how the explanation that appeal to such emergent causal powers will run. What is it that has the emergent causal powers? Or does it get to exercise them? In Oppy's view, it is inconsistent with naturalism to suppose that natural loving actions in relationship and emergent causal powers will somehow constitute further real, sophisticated, transformative agency in the world. Some of what Bishop says suggests uncertainty about exactly what should be claimed to be divine. If bishops identify the divine with the sum of total loving interpersonal relationship in the universe, then while naturalists can accept that there is some total of loving interpersonal relationships in the universe, the question that naturalists will want to ask is what makes it the case that some total of loving interpersonal relationships in the bears the label divine. Naturalists can agree, and many, if not all, do agree that loving interpersonal relationships are a very good thing. But recognizing that loving interpersonal relationships are very good thing doesn't mean to take us any distance at all towards the view that loving interpersonal relationships deserve the label divine. If, on the other hand, Bishop maintains that what is divine is the full cosmic meaning of interpersonal relationship, then the question that naturalists will want to ask is, what do you take the full cosmic meaning of interpersonal loving relationships to be? If the answer to that question is the intervention loving action in relationships if they have emerged casual powers that somehow constitute for the real subversive transformative agency in the world, as we have already seen, naturalists will deny deny that there is such emergent casual powers. But of course, in making this denial, naturalists need not be denying there is very little, if anything, in our universe that is better than loving interpersonal relationships. In his discussion on the justification for his Christian commitment, Bishop notes that the Christian commitment is to an ethical ideal, it is also a commitment to the world being set for hopefully and steadfast seeking that ideal. If we understood this commitment in the way that Bishop does as commitment to claim that existence is ultimately for the sake of the good, then it seems to me that naturalists cannot accept it for the reason given above. However, it will take the ethical idea to be one to live virtuously, where that is understood to include living lovingly ideal, what the nature universe may make it difficult. For for some of the time, in some places to pursue this ideal. It seems to me that naturalists can perfectly well suppose that our universe is on the whole a place in which we can hopefully and steadfastly pursue the ideal life. And these are the reasons why naturalism and pantheism is false.